Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little different. Something that starts not with a scream, but with a soft hum of static, the kind that raises goosebumps along your arms before your brain has time to ask why. Imagine you're alone in a radio booth. The lights are low. Outside the glass, it's just shadows and rain tapping on the roof. You're queuing up the next segment when something odd slides out from the bottom drawer, a reel-to-reel tape in a canister you definitely didn't put there. No label, no note, just the reel heavy with age and a faint whiff of burnt dust. And because you're curious, or maybe because you've worked the night shift too long, you thread it onto the deck and hit play. What comes out isn't music, isn't a voice, it's a hush, a tremble. Like wind trying to speak through a throat that's long since dried up. At first I thought it was broken, until I heard my own name, whispered. Twice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your current location and local time in the comments, just so I know where all this energy is traveling from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It started a few nights ago when the station's overnight janitor found a dusty reel wedged behind a filing cabinet, one of those old metal canisters oxidized like something you'd expect to see on a Wubby battlefield, not a community FM booth. He brought it up joking that it might be a Cold War PSA about ducking under desks, but I saw his hands were shaking a little. Maybe from the cold. Maybe not. The station is old. Our building used to be a telegraph post in the 30s, part of the original emergency warning network. After Wubby, it became a broadcast relay, then finally our sleepy little radio studio. And in all that time, nobody bothered to throw anything away. So when this reel came up, my curiosity short-circuited my common sense. I stayed after the show, alone, coffee going lukewarm beside the board, and I played it. At first, nothing. Just ambient hiss, the kind you expect from magnetic tape that's seen too many humid summers. But then underneath it, something new crept in. A metallic rhythm like footsteps dragging through gravel. I leaned closer. You ever have that feeling someone's whispering just behind your ear, but you know there's nobody there? The whisper came in then. Scratchy, faint, but unmistakably human. And it said my name, Alex. Twice. I stopped the tape, rewound, played it again. Same thing, same whisper, same metallic scrape. But the second time it added something. Right after my name, you left me here. Now I haven't left anyone anywhere. Not in the way that voice meant. But there was a tremor in it. Anger buried under grief. Like a voicemail from someone you ghosted 10 years ago, echoing through miles of static. It felt personal even though I didn't know who or what it was. That's when the lights flickered. Just once. Just enough to break the illusion that this was all a prank or a trick of the ear. You see, our booth runs on its own. Power supply, backup, batteries, fail-safes, surge protection, the whole thing. For it to flicker, something else had to interfere. I turned off the deck and took the reel home. I know, dumb idea. But I needed to listen to it somewhere I could think, somewhere I could isolate the sound. At home, I digitized it, filtered the frequencies, and played it through a visualizer. That's when the real horror started. The waveform wasn't right. It moved. I don't mean the sound bounced like normal. I mean the waveform twisted into shapes. There was a moment at the 0333 timestamp where it clearly formed an outline of a face, long, wide-set eyes, hollow cheeks, mouth open in a scream or maybe a song. And if that wasn't weird enough, when I paused the track, the whisper continued. Faint. Almost like the room remembered the sound and kept humming it back to me. That night I couldn't sleep. The reel was in the other room, sealed in a Tupperware, like it might leak ghost juice into the walls. But I still kept hearing my name. First in my dreams, then somewhere between sleep and waking. Alex, you left me here. And I remembered something, or rather someone I'd tried hard to forget. There was this girl in high school, Lydia. She ran the AV club obsessed with old radio equipment. She used to say voices never really disappeared. They just waited for someone to listen again. We'd hang out at the abandoned transmitter tower, out past Raven Hill, play with old shortwave gear record, dumb audio dramas. One night she vanished. Nobody ever found her. Just her cassette deck left running. I hadn't thought about Lydia in years. But hearing that whisper, I swear it was her voice. Older. Hoarse. Like someone who'd been yelling underground for years and finally clawed her way up into the airwaves. Maybe I didn't leave her, but I did stop looking. That's almost worse. So I went back to the station the next night, the reel still locked up, and I started combing through our archives looking for anything off. And that's when I found the second reel, sitting on my desk. No one had access, no label, just a single post-it next one's louder. I haven't played it yet. Not all the way. But I did rewind it just to hear how long it was. The reel ticked backward for 47 minutes. That's not possible for that size. The static was louder this time, and under it not one but two voices. I think Lydia's not alone anymore. I should have walked away right then. I should have left the reel in the archive room, locked the door, and called in sick for the week. But the thing about curiosity is, it's louder than fear, especially at 2 a.m. when the city's asleep and the ghosts have the run of the place. I threaded the second reel onto the player, but didn't hit play. Not yet. I just sat there in the booth, headphones around my neck, staring at the spinning reels like they might start talking on their own. The little monitor lights blinked softly, like tiny hearts beating in sync. Then, on a whim, I flipped on the station's external mic. It's an old piece of gear. Used to be part of a weather monitoring rig mounted on the roof, now just picks up environmental sound if we want to layer in ambiance. But the moment I turned it on, something strange came through. Not wind, not traffic, not the patter of rain. It was singing. A child's voice, low and echoing like it was being carried on wind from far away. And it wasn't a lullaby or a pop song. It was the kind of melody you only hear in old nursery books. Something circular, rhyming, and wrong. I hit record. The waveform on screen trembled, not like sound, but like heat mirage. And for a few seconds, just under the child's voice, there was an adult voice muttering something beneath the melody. It was like a duet no one wanted to hear. And then, silence. Everything cut out. I leaned toward the mic and whispered, "Who are you?" And clear as day, the kid's voice answered back, "You found us." I ripped the headphones off and backed away so hard I knocked my coffee over. The tape was still running. The lights were still blinking. And outside the glass, just beyond the booth window, I saw someone standing in the hallway. But here's the thing. No one else was in the station. I had the only key that night. The figure didn't move, didn't shift. Just stood there right where the light from the on-air sign bled into the darkness. I reached for the intercom. Dead. My phone battery gone, even though I'd charged it 2 hours earlier. Then, like someone flipping a light switch, the hallway emptied. The shape vanished. No footsteps, no door creak. Just gone. It reminded me of something I read once in early 1900s spiritualist circles. They believed ghosts couldn't appear unless you invited them with sound bell chimes, EVP spoken names. Sound was the medium literally, which made me wonder, how many voices had I played over the airwaves over the years, not knowing what or who I was letting through? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I took the reel home again. This time I didn't play it, just stared at it. Pictured the label it should have had. Something like Property of the Dead. Do not rewind. The next morning, the station's receptionist, a woman named Marie, who's been there since cassette days, pulled me aside. "You've been messing with the archives?" she asked. I nodded, thinking she was going to scold me for digging around unsupervised. Instead, she said, "You ever hear of the Delta tapes?" I hadn't. But the moment she said it, something in my bones clenched. She told me it was a nickname given to a series of lost reels from a closed college radio station in the 1960s, Delta College, long since shuttered. Legend says they recorded a segment called Ghost Lines, where students read real ghost stories submitted by listeners. One night, a tape played without anyone cueing it. Dead air, then someone speaking in a language nobody recognized. They say 5 students dropped out that week. One vanished entirely. The tapes were locked away, but over the years they started showing up in odd places. Basements, libraries, dumpsters, and apparently radio stations. Marie said she recognized the handwriting on my mystery post-it. She used to get notes like that in her locker. 50 years ago, from a friend who died in a tower fire. You ever get chills inside your skull? I asked her if she still had any of those tapes. She said no, but she remembered something else. During the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, a shortwave operator in San Francisco picked up a voice signal during the blackout that looped the phrase, "Let me back in," over and over. The only identifier on the transmission was the name Delta One, and here I was, holding a reel labeled only with a sticky note and bad intentions. I left the station early and went out to Raven Hill. I hadn't been there since Lydia disappeared. The place was overgrown now, barely a gravel path leading to what used to be the transmitter shack. I took the second reel with me, like I was returning something I shouldn't have borrowed. But the shack wasn't abandoned. Inside, someone had lit candles, arranged in a circle around an ancient tape deck. A real Frankenstein thing, parts soldered together from at least 3 different machines. And in the deck was a third reel, already spinning. I swear I didn't touch it, but the tape played anyway, and this time it wasn't just voices, it was screaming. Dozens, maybe more, twisting into harmony. A tower of agony that made the air in my lungs feel thicker, like I was breathing inside someone's memory. And just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the tape went quiet. Then one last voice came through, gentle, female, familiar. It said I'm almost home. That night I dreamed of wires, tangled through teeth, threads of magnetic tape curled through tree branches. Lydia standing in the middle of the shack with empty eyes and a smile too wide. She whispered one more reel. I didn't go back to the station the next day. I should have called in sick. Should have said I had a sore throat, or maybe just pulled the classic food poisoning excuse. But something about the dream, Lydia's smile, the words, "one more reel," sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. I couldn't move on with my day until I knew if there was a third tape, and more importantly, if it was already inside the station. So around sunset, I returned. Now you've probably never walked into a radio station after dark when the power's only working in patches. But it feels like stepping into a dead lung, the way the silence hums, the way fluorescent lights twitch like they're remembering how to be alive. You walk in and the whole place feels off, like someone's just stepped out of the room a second before you entered. That's what it was like that night, except no one had stepped out. Someone or something was waiting. I found the third reel before I even reached the booth. It was sitting on the stool just outside the soundproof door. No case, no label, just the reel slightly warm to the touch. And yes, I picked it up anyway. I know. Classic horror story behavior. But there's something magnetic about these tapes. Not just literally, emotionally. Like they hum at the exact frequency your curiosity needs to override common sense. The moment I touched it, I heard something. Not through speakers inside my ear. Like a breath brushing my eardrum. It said, "Welcome back." This time I didn't plug it in. I put it in my backpack and locked the studio door behind me. And I drove. No destination, just forward motion. Past the overpass where they say a woman in white asks for rides, past the old textile factory that's always lit up even though it's been abandoned since 1971. I ended up in the one place I promised myself I'd never visit again, Lydia's apartment. The landlord had never rented it out after she disappeared, claimed it was too much work. but from the outside it still looked like she could walk back in at any moment. Lights off, curtains half drawn, mail jammed in the slot like a clogged artery. I let myself in with the key she gave me years ago and walked straight to the living room. Nothing had moved. The dusty tea mug still sat on the coffee table. Her throw blanket still draped the couch like she'd just stepped out to grab the mail. I sat down, took the reel out, and something strange happened. The apartment shifted. The air grew cooler, but not in a natural way. It was like time had slowed. The light through the curtains took on that amber hue you only see during eclipses. And for a few seconds I could feel her. Not metaphorically, physically. The shape of her presence in the room. I placed the reel on the floor and said, "Lydia, is this yours?" No answer. But the lights in the kitchen flickered once. Then again. Morse code, maybe. Or a yes. So I did something incredibly stupid. I opened my recorder app and hit play on my phone. Not through speakers, just a direct file conversion. The tape hissed and cracked like it had been left in a fire. Then, silence. For maybe 30 seconds. And then, my voice. Not past me, current me. It said, "You never should have brought it here." I dropped the phone so hard, the screen spiderwebbed. Somewhere in the building, I heard a door slam open loud like drywall cracked. I bolted, ran down the stairs, barely hit the front door, before the stairwell lights all shut off behind me in one smooth sweep. Later that night, after I'd gone home and triple-locked my door, I finally listened to the full tape with noise-canceling headphones. What I heard still makes my skin go cold when I think about it. It started with breathing, then distant scratching like fingernails across wood, then voices, too many voices, layered on top of each other like an audio lasagna. Some clear, some whispery. But one phrase kept coming up over and over, "Reel 4 is mine." And that's when I realized there was a fourth tape. The thing is, no one ever told me how many existed. The Delta tapes. Marie said they were rumored to be 6 in total, but no one had verified that. And suddenly it felt less like I was uncovering a ghost story, and more like I was following a breadcrumb trail laid by something that wanted to be found. It reminded me of the Voynich manuscript. You know, the one written in a completely undecipherable language. People have studied it for centuries, convinced there's a hidden message. Some say it's a hoax. Others say it's proof of alien contact. But what if it's not meant to be read? What if it's meant to be heard? I was starting to believe these reels were that kind of cipher. Not for us, but for something else. A kind of signal that attracted listeners. Because the more I played them, the less alone I felt. Even in my own apartment, lights off, windows locked, there was always this sense that someone was sitting just out of frame. Waiting. Not maliciously. Just observing. Like I was the experiment. So I went back to the station one last time that week. No pretense, no show to host. Just a mission. Find the fourth reel. I dug through every drawer, every file cabinet. Checked behind the vending machine inside the acoustic panels. Nothing. But when I opened the fridge in the break room, there it was. Wrapped in tinfoil. Labeled, "Do not microwave." Because of course it was. I didn't bring it home. I took it straight to Raven Hill. Because I had a feeling this one needed to go back. Raven Hill isn't on any tourist map. You only find it if you already know where to look, or if something wants you to. It's one of those places people in town whisper about when they think you're not listening. A former Civil War lookout turned radio tower base, turned abandoned transmission site. Local teens call it the Screaming Tree, even though there aren't any trees left up there. Just a rusted broadcast antenna, some gutted buildings, and a view of the valley that always seems just a bit too wide. And that night I drove there like I was being pulled by a magnet buried under the dirt. The fourth reel sat in my passenger seat, still wrapped in foil. I hadn't even touched it since the fridge. But the air in the car was different, like the tape had its own atmosphere. Every now and then the headlights would flicker. Not fully, but like the car was flinching, Even my GPS started acting up, rerouting me to unnamed road every few minutes, then back to the right path. I should have turned around. I didn't. I parked at the base of the hill and hiked the last half-mile up. No trail, just memory. As a kid, we used to dare each other to come here. Bet a Coke you couldn't stay 5 minutes past sunset. One kid swore he saw someone kneeling by the antenna praying in reverse. Another claimed the place made his nose bleed the second he stepped over the threshold. We laughed, but no one went twice. The old control room was still standing when I reached the top. Door caved in, windows broken, but somehow the shelves were all intact. Tape decks, analog mixers, wires like overgrown ivy. It smelled like mildew ash and something faintly metallic like rusted blood. I placed the reel on the console, unwrapped it. It wasn't like the others. This one pulsed faintly, like there was a heartbeat under the film. I didn't plug it into anything. There was nothing to plug it into anymore. But the moment I set it down, sound began to fill the room. Not loud, more like memory bleeding through the walls. A piano, distant humming, the cry of gulls. Then a whisper. "You brought it back." And I whispered yes. The air changed. Suddenly I wasn't alone. I couldn't see them, just feel them. Like a temperature drop behind you, or the pressure in your ears when a storm rolls in. They filled the corners, pooled in the ceiling. Cracks crawled up through the floorboards. It felt like being inside a cathedral underwater. One voice rose above the rest. It said, "Play it." I sat down in the broken chair. There was no working speaker, no deck, nothing that should have allowed the reel to be heard. But it played anyway, and I saw her again. Lydia. Not alive, not dead, just suspended. Like her image had been Xeroxed over and over, and now lived in the grain of the reel itself. Her mouth moved, but the words didn't sink. Her eyes stayed on me the entire time, and she smiled. That same smile from the dream. She began to speak. And I swear to you what came out of that reel was my voice again. But it was older, more tired. It said, "You should not have come here. This reel doesn't just play. It remembers. Every time it spins deeper into you." And then it cut to static. Long, loud, deep static, like standing inside an airplane turbine. My nose started bleeding. My hands wouldn't move. My teeth felt like they were vibrating in their roots. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure. Memory being recorded in reverse. When it stopped, I was outside. I don't remember walking there. I was standing at the edge of the cliff. The antenna loomed behind me like a metal skeleton. The reel was gone, and there was a new one in my backpack. It was smaller than the others. Labeled child. I didn't open it. I didn't unwrap it. I got in the car and drove straight to the station. I left the reel in the basement, locked the door behind me. Called a locksmith to bolt it shut permanently. But that night at 2:17 a.m., the station got a call. The line buzzed like it was being chewed on. I answered. Silence. Then a child's voice. "Can I hear my story now?" I froze. It laughed soft and gurgly like it had water in its lungs. Then the line disconnected. That's when I started researching. Obsessively. And I found something. In 1957, Raven Hill was the site of a broadcast experiment run by a man named Dr. Ellis Farrow, a pioneer in sonic memory encoding. His theory, that sound could carry emotional weight across media formats, even imprint on environments. He believed frequencies below human hearing could preserve trauma like a fingerprint. His lab was shut down after 3 assistants went missing. The last thing he transmitted was a 19-minute loop of crying children. No one knows where that reel is, but I think I do, because the next day I got a package. No return address, just my name handwritten in red ink. Inside, a 5th reel, labeled Listener. I didn't touch the 5th reel for almost a week. I left it in the studio closet behind the old mic stands and dusty station banners tucked between a box of tangled XLR cables and an unopened shipment of branded mugs. But every night I stayed late, I felt it pulling at me. Not literally, not physically, but mentally. Like the reel knew I was trying to ignore it and was patiently waiting for that moment of weakness. And when it came, it didn't pounce. It whispered. That's what made it worse. I lasted until Friday night. It was late. The kind of late where the station hums like a sleeping animal, and the vending machine makes sad little noises because nobody's touched it in hours. I had just wrapped my midnight segment and was about to head home when the power flickered, not just in the lights, but in me, like a nerve misfiring somewhere in the dark corner of my brain. And I knew it was time. The fifth reel was smaller than the others, lighter too, like it was hollow. The label was crooked, listener written in black Sharpie, then traced over in red ink. My fingers tingled when I picked it up. A cold pins and needles kind of tingle that didn't stop at the skin. I thought of Dr. Farrow again. How his final report had mentioned active response audio. Recordings that don't just play, they change based on who's listening. So I closed the studio door, unplugged the phones, and slid the reel into the last working deck we had. I didn't press play. It played itself. First silence, then breathing. Heavy, slow, and wet like lungs filled with something they couldn't name. Then my voice, but not my voice. It was me, yes. But it was like listening to an old voicemail you don't remember leaving. The tone was off. Too formal. Like I was reading someone else's script. It said, "You're not alone in this booth." I turned around. Of course, nothing was there. But when I turned back, the reel had jumped ahead like a scratch on a record, and I heard a name I hadn't heard in 15 years. Greg Thompson. Greg was my first co-host. Back when I was still green and thought haunted stories were just ratings bait. We used to joke that the late-night shift had ghosts, old DJs who couldn't let go of the mic. One night he dared me to stay in the booth alone until sunrise with a reel we found in the archive. No label, just static. I made it to 4:12 a.m. before I blacked out. When I woke up, the booth smelled like burnt hair, and Greg was gone. He never came back. I told everyone he just quit. I lied, because that night I heard him again, on the tape, screaming. Not screaming words, not even pain, just pure panic. Like something was peeling his brain open through his ears. I hit stop. Nothing happened. The tape kept playing, and now I could see it. Not just in my mind, not imagined. The booth walls began to shimmer like heat waves on asphalt, and they started showing faces. Not reflections, not shadows. Faces. Half-formed, open-mouthed mid-breath, like someone had taken a group photo during a fire drill. Then they began mouthing my name, over and over, soft at first, then louder, until the reel snapped. Not stopped, snapped, split clean in half like someone had taken scissors to a nerve. The air snapped with it. Suddenly I could move again. The booth light popped, the monitors flickered. Then silence, but not real silence, 'cause I could still hear them, somewhere between my ears and the walls they kept whispering, just beyond comprehension. You ever hear your name spoken in a dream, only to wake up and feel like someone had just been beside you? It was that. And I think that's when I knew this wasn't just about haunted tapes. It was about me. The moment I realized that the static on the station monitor screens that shouldn't have even been on cleared. And there I was, live on air, my face staring back at me, pale, blank-eyed mouth slightly open. Except I wasn't broadcasting. At least I hadn't pressed anything. And then I heard a caller. Line 1, the screen said. Except the phone wasn't even plugged in. I answered. A voice said, "You're getting close." Then click. This is where I did something stupid. I took the broken tape home. Yeah, I know. I told myself I needed time to study it, to see what was left on the magnetic strip. But the truth, I think I wanted it near me. Like part of me was already being recorded onto it. You ever read about the Dyatlov Pass? 9 hikers, Russian Ural Mountains. All found dead under mysterious conditions, some missing eyes, tongues, suffering trauma inconsistent with exposure. One theory, infrasound, a wind phenomenon that can trigger overwhelming dread panic, even hallucinations. I think these tapes are that. Condensed dread, emotional residue encoded so deeply it leaks. That night I dreamed of Greg again. Only this time he wasn't screaming. He was standing in the hallway of my apartment, wearing headphones, bleeding from the ears, holding a reel. He mouthed one word, 6, and then I woke up. The 6th reel was waiting in my kitchen, labeled Sleeper. The reel labeled Sleeper was already loaded into my portable player when I found it on the kitchen table. That stopped me cold. I hadn't even touched the damn thing yet. But the machine was prepped, like it had been waiting spooled perfectly ready to roll. I didn't own blank reels. Nobody does anymore. That gear is extinct like typewriters or blockbuster cards. And yet here it was, purring softly like a predator pretending to nap. I didn't hit play. It started on its own. A whisper at first softer than static, but with that same dissonant shape to it, like the sound of someone humming from beneath a floorboard. Then the tone shifted, warbled, and dropped into a voice. Mine again. Always mine. But it wasn't saying anything. It was just breathing. Deep, labored, rhythmic. Inhale. Exhale. Just like someone sleeping too hard. The reel ran that for 3 full minutes. Then without warning, it said in my voice, "Do you remember the 3rd floor of the station?" I froze. Of course I remembered. How could I forget? The 3rd floor had been sealed off since 2003 after a fire tore through the archive room. Supposedly faulty wiring. They never reopened it. Management kept everything hush-hush. But I'd been up there once. Only once. I was still new. Just a weekend filler slot helping with overnights. The station manager sent me to look for old holiday bumpers, pre-recorded promos we could reuse. I took the wrong stairs and ended up on the 3rd floor instead of the 2nd. It was dark. Musty, the carpet crunched underfoot like it was rotting from the inside. Every door had been stripped of labels. The windows were blacked out from soot or maybe something darker. The hallway was silent, except for the faint sound of a music box playing behind one of the doors. I didn't stay long, but I never forgot that sound. The reel's voice continued. "You left something behind." Then I heard the music box again. Same tune, same warbled pitch, except now it was getting faster. Too fast. The sound twisted in on itself until it wasn't music anymore. It was just a screeching loop of broken melody, like someone cranked a jack-in-the-box handle past the point of sanity. And beneath it, layered in, was my own sleep-talking voice, repeating one phrase over and over. "Let me out! Let me out! Let me out!" I yanked the plug on the machine. Nothing happened. It kept playing. I took the batteries out. Still playing. Eventually, I had to throw it into the bathtub and run cold water over it to stop it. Even then, it hissed like a dying snake as the magnetic tape inside melted. My entire apartment smelled like ozone and mold for days after that. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hallway again. The 3rd floor with its warped walls and doorless rooms. Only now there were voices behind each door. Familiar ones. Listeners, callers, co-hosts long dead or gone. All whispering, all humming that tune. All waiting for me to come back. And at the end of the hallway, a shape, tall, thin, head cocked too far to one side, holding something in its hands. Another reel. This one labeled host. I didn't go into the station the next day. I called out sick, first time in years. I told myself I'd burned out. That this was just stress auditory hallucinations from too many late nights in soundproof boxes. But you know what's worse than hearing ghosts in a booth, hearing nothing. That next night, the silence in my apartment felt wrong. It was too perfect, too padded. Like something was absorbing the sound around me. Like the quiet wasn't absence, but intent. And then my phone rang. Unknown caller. I answered it because of course I did. There was a voice on the other end. Familiar. It said, "You fell asleep again." Then I heard the music box. Click. I didn't even realize I'd dropped the phone until the screen cracked on the floor. I spent the rest of the night walking circles in my living room, clutching a flashlight like it could save me from sound. Somewhere around 3:00 a.m., I heard footsteps on the ceiling. Not creaks, not pipes. Footsteps. I live on the top floor. There shouldn't be anyone above me. It was at that point I remembered something strange about radio history. During World War II, the BBC banned certain types of broadcasts from airing between midnight and 5 a.m. Not because of enemy signals, but because listeners reported phantom harmonics. Sounds woven into the broadcast that didn't come from the station. Tones that caused panic hallucinations, even death. One engineer took a recording of it home. He killed his entire family 2 days later. The audio was destroyed, but fragments were said to remain in the frequency hiss between dead stations, right where the sleeper reel began. I didn't go back to sleep for 3 days after that. When I finally crashed, it was sitting in the booth at 4:12 a.m., the same time I passed out the night Greg disappeared. And guess what? I found in front of me when I woke up. Another reel, label worn, but just barely legible. It said callback, and beside it was a script, typed on the station's old typewriter. My name on top. First line. Hey guys, tonight we're talking about the voices you don't want to hear. The next reel was already playing, and the phones were ringing. You ever notice how phone rings sound different at 3 a.m.? I don't mean just louder. I mean wrong. They echo too long, like the sound is bouncing down some unseen hallway, one that doesn't belong to your house. That's how it was in the booth that night. The station was dark. Phones shouldn't have been working. Hell, half the power was still out from that storm a week prior, but the red light blinked steady. Line 1. It kept going. 3 rings, pause, 3 more. Just like Morse code. I picked up. The line was dead at first. Just white noise, hissing. But I knew better than to hang up. There's a pattern to that kind of silence. It's like walking into a dark cave. You listen harder, not softer. Eventually, the hiss shifted, rearranged itself into a voice that wasn't quite mine and wasn't quite anyone else's either. It said, "Don't stop the tape." I looked down. That old reel machine, yes. The one I'd soaked in my tub. The one I'd tossed out with a grimace and a prayer it was back. Sitting on the desk, dry, spinning, and it was playing something new. Static again. But layered in that static were names. First mine, then Greg's, then names I hadn't thought about in years. Tamara, the station's first female DJ from way back in the 80s. She vanished in 1991 after reporting weird voices bleeding into her shows. Most people assumed she just moved on, maybe took a gig in LA. But those of us who grew up listening never forgot her final broadcast, cut short by 15 seconds of garbled whispering and one high-pitched scream. Next name, Andre, the engineer, the guy who rigged our soundproofing to be more secure after that incident with the crying child audio loop. He died in his car, locked inside. Windows fogged, radio still blaring, but the volume knob had been torn off. Each name brought a new voice. They weren't speaking to me exactly. They were relaying something, a message. One line repeated over and over in a dozen tones and cadences. The signal protects what the flesh cannot. I know, it sounds like nonsense, but remember what I told you about the BBC banning late-night broadcasts. Turns out they weren't the only ones. During the Cold War, Soviet researchers experimented with long-wave signal patterns to simulate psychic feedback. They believed certain harmonics could tap into human consciousness like a tuning fork. Rumor is they accidentally made contact with something that answered back, something that used our voices. And that's what I kept hearing on that tape. Echoes of people who touched that signal, who couldn't untouch it. The phone call ended on its own, just clicked. And then, like it had been waiting for the right cue, the machine stopped spinning. That's when the light flickered again. Not overhead, from the hallway. You've been in radio stations. You know how those long corridors look at night. Endless, stretched, too quiet, like liminal space had an address. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was something standing just outside the studio door. I could see the outline through the frosted glass. Not moving, not breathing. Just there. Tall, lean. Slight tilt to the head like it was listening in. The same posture as the shape I saw in my dreams after the sleeper tape. It didn't move, didn't breathe. The lights buzzed overhead, old fluorescent ballast hum. And for a second I swore I heard myself humming along with it. Then the studio door creaked open, slow and empty. No one came in, but the air changed. You know that shift in pressure before a thunderstorm, that hollow feeling in your ears like altitude sickness. That, I swear to you, I swear something walked into the room without touching the floor. I could hear it, feel it. Its presence sank into the walls like water into drywall. Everything became damp, not physically, spiritually. The kind of saturation you can't towel off. And then the phone rang again. Line 2, another red light. I let it ring 4, 5, 6 times, then picked up with a shaking hand. This time the voice was mine, definitely mine, just more tired. It said, "I'm not you." Then it hung up. Dead air for exactly 13 seconds. And then behind me I heard the reel machine eject the tape. Clean, sharp, like a knife unsheathing. I turned around slowly. The tape sitting on the desk wasn't blank. It was labeled record. I didn't put it in, didn't press anything, but it started rolling again. Recording. I could see the red live bulb flicker above my head, and the mic hot. Definitely hot. I checked the board, everything was patched straight to the transmitter. Something was broadcasting, using my voice. I tried to shut it down, hit the mute switch. Nothing. I pulled the mic cable, still broadcasting. I killed the breaker, still broadcasting. At this point, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Not proud of that, but I sprinted out the booth, down the corridor, past the lobby where the clock on the wall had started spinning backward, and into the parking lot barefoot. Didn't stop running until I hit Main Street and nearly got sideswiped by a milk truck. When I came back the next morning, everything was normal. Bored cold, no tapes, no phone records. Just me, an empty booth, and a faint echo in the monitor speakers. A whisper, barely audible, repeating over and over, "Don't stop the tape." And somehow I knew it meant keep telling the stories, keep the signal alive, because something out there needs us to. I stayed away for a while after that night, tried to convince myself I was just tired, sleep deprived. Too many hours alone in a dim studio where ghosts of static and memory got tangled up in the wires. I told myself stories like that the way people used to whistle past graveyards. But even when I was home, curled up with all the lights on and every speaker unplugged, the voices didn't stop. They just got quieter, more intentional. See, the scariest ghosts don't scream. They suggest. And when I finally came back to the booth almost 2 weeks later, I found a letter taped to the console, not mailed. Handwritten. Left on the board with a piece of red duct tape, the same kind we use to mark hot cables. The paper was damp, and the handwriting looked rushed, as if the writer had been looking over their shoulder the entire time. The letter read, "You're the last one who remembers the frequency. We used to be 12, then 6, then 2. Now it's you. Don't let them take the archive. No signature, no return address. No one else had access to the station that night. And as soon as I read the last line, the old closet door in the back of the studio creaked open. That closet had been locked since the 90s. Nobody remembered what was inside. Some said it used to hold emergency gear. Others thought it was just for coats and extra cables. But when I stepped in, I found shelves stacked floor to ceiling with unmarked cassette tapes. Hundreds of them, some labeled with names, others with times and coordinates. One just said, "Do not play." Naturally, I played that one first. Yeah, I know. Dumb move. Classic horror protagonist mistake. But curiosity is louder than common sense when you're sleep-deprived and full of ghosts. The sound that came through the headphones wasn't a voice. It was a heartbeat, steady, wet, real, followed by breathing that didn't match mine. And then a sound like fingertips on glass tap, drag tap close to the mic. Too close. Suddenly the booth's window behind me fogged up from the inside. But I hadn't exhaled. And then slowly something began writing across the condensation. One word, run. Look, there's a lot of urban legends about haunted media. You've probably heard about the cursed video game cartridge found at a garage sale, or the CD that makes people hallucinate when played in reverse. But this wasn't myth. This was direct contact, intelligent, personal. That tape knew me. I yanked it from the deck, tossed it in the sink in the break room, and filled it with lighter fluid. It screamed. It screamed, man. You ever hear plastic scream? It melts weird. It curls up like it's trying to get away. And under all that, I swear I heard someone begging in Morse code. So of course I grabbed the rest of the box and stuffed it in my trunk. I didn't know what to do with them yet, but instinct told me they were important. Like they held the raw data of something much older and much deeper than just dead people. This wasn't just ghost radio anymore. It was archive warfare. The thing is, if you really want to understand this part of the story, you have to know about the Ghost Army. Real thing. During World War II, the US deployed a secret unit of artists, sound engineers, and radio techs who used inflatable tanks and fake transmissions to trick the Nazis. The goal wasn't to kill, it was to confuse. They'd broadcast fake orders from empty woods, complete with recorded marching sounds and whispered commands. Why? Because they learned early that sound can deceive just as effectively as sight. That fact stuck with me as I drove home that night with 64 tapes rattling in my trunk. I kept thinking, what if the archive isn't just recordings? What if it's a kind of camouflage? A way to shield us from whatever's really out there. Back at my apartment, I put on gloves and started sorting the tapes on my kitchen table. Each one was labeled in that same sharp handwriting initials, timestamps, and something that looked like channel frequencies. Some matched known AM stations. Others didn't. One tape was labeled KLSX 333 AM 1997. That one hit me in the gut. Because in 1997, there was a brief, undocumented return of KLSX, a Los Angeles talk station that had supposedly been dead since 1994. One night for exactly 11 minutes, KLSX returned. No DJs, no commercials, just the voice of a man reciting numbers. Thousands of callers flooded the FCC. No explanation was given, and now I had the tape. I hesitated, but I played it. Same numbers, same voice. Only this time, at minute 5, the numbers stopped, and my name played back in reverse. Not just your name backward reverse. My actual voice reversed, saying, "They're in the static." I shut it off. Too late, because every speaker in my apartment, including the Bluetooth one I hadn't even paired, crackled to life. Then breathing. Wet, ragged, invasive. Then whispering. Different languages. None human. I ran to the circuit breaker and killed the power. Everything went silent, except one thing. A faint humming coming from my pocket. My phone. Screen on. No signal. Just that same phrase on the lock screen. Don't let them take the archive. I didn't sleep that night. The tape sat in a box in the corner of my living room, too heavy with meaning to touch again. I tried to bury them under a blanket, but it felt like putting a hat on a live grenade. Every few minutes I swore I heard a hiss of static leaking from underneath, like something waiting for me to press play again. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old college radio professor, Dr. Stan Becker. A wiry man with fingers like coiled wire and a voice that sounded like it had been filtered through old jazz records. Back in the day, he used to run Frequency Lab's Weird Sessions, where we listened to shortwave transmissions from distant countries, or tried to catch ghost signals bouncing off the ionosphere. He answered on the first ring. "Ah," he said before I even introduced myself. "You found one." "Found what?" "The archive." I didn't speak for a second. He filled the silence. "Don't burn any more of the tapes. That's how they spread." Now that was a sentence I didn't expect before breakfast. He told me to meet him at a diner on the outskirts of town. Said it was the only place they couldn't hear us. I took a detour through the park just to make sure I wasn't being followed, not by people, but by anything else. And still, by the time I got to the diner, the waitress already had coffee waiting for me. "He said you'd be early," she winked. Becker looked worse than I remembered, gaunt, yellowed eyes, hands that trembled slightly when he stirred his drink. But his mind was as sharp as ever. And what he told me there over burnt eggs and bottomless coffee changed how I saw everything. He said the archive wasn't a single place. It was a pattern, a recurrence. It shows up every few decades, he said. A collection of recorded voices calls confessions ghostly incidents. Always analog, always local, and always untraceable once it disappears again. But the content is eerily consistent. I asked him what he meant. He handed me a napkin with a frequency scrawled in blue ink, 1600 kHz. That's where I first heard it. Back in 1973, middle of the night, a voice came through reading a letter. Said it was written by a girl who'd been buried alive in 1922. Told her whole story, detail by detail. But the kicker, the last line of the letter was a direct quote from my dissertation, which hadn't even been written yet. He leaned in, and then she said my name. My stomach dropped, because that matched something I'd heard. One of the unlabeled tapes in my box had a woman's voice whispering things from my life. My favorite childhood snack, the name of the dog I'd lost in high school, even the broken phone number I used for prank calls in 7th grade. Stuff no one else would know. Becker continued. They talk to us because we listen. Radio people are sensitive that way. You ever notice how many old broadcasters die young or go missing? He wasn't kidding. I remembered reading about Art Bell's odd experiences or the tragic disappearance of Larry Norton in 1985, one moment live on air the next. Gone. No sign, no noise, just silence where his voice used to be. But what do they want, I asked. Becker's eyes darkened. I used to think they wanted to be remembered. Now I think they want to replace us. A fly buzzed around our table. Becker swatted at it absently. They can't create, only mimic. That's why they need the tapes. It's how they learn us. The more you play them, the more they grow. He reached into his jacket and handed me a cassette marked with a red X. Last copy. Listen to it only once, then bury it in salt. That would have been a perfect moment to leave dramatically, but I still hadn't finished my toast. I left the diner feeling like I'd just been handed a loaded revolver, but instead of bullets, it held memories I didn't recognize. That night back in the studio, the phone rang again. Line 1. But when I answered, there was no static, just a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. Hey, it said, you still play requests. It was my college roommate Eric, only Eric had died in a car crash in 2015. I froze. Come on, the voice said. One more for the road. You still got my mixtape. I dug through my old desk drawer, and sure enough, there it was. A dusty Maxell tape labeled for night drives. When I played it, something bizarre happened. The tape didn't play his voice, it played mine, reciting a story I'd never written about a radio host who got a call from the dead and answered. The story ended with the host disappearing mid-broadcast live on air. The line went dead. My phone battery drained to 0. The studio lights flickered, and that smell again, ozone and rotting paper. Here's the creepy part when I checked the booth camera footage. The next morning, it showed someone else sitting in my chair, watching me. Same hair, same hoodie, same movements, but a different face. And it looked older. You ever see your own ghost? Because I think I did. And I think he wants the show now. I don't know how to explain it, but when I looked back at the footage, it was like everything stopped. The air around me turned heavier, thicker, almost as if the very walls of the studio were pressing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Just that image, the face of someone who was me, but wasn't me, staring back from the monitor. I tried to move, but it was like I was trapped. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it had ever ticked before, each second stretching out, dragging me deeper into the weird sensation of déjà vu. It wasn't until the sound of the door creaking open behind me that I snapped out of it. I turned around, half expecting to see some prankster standing there with a camera. But no one was there. Just the dim lights of the studio, the hum of the equipment, and the persistent buzzing of the fluorescent lights above. Then the phone rang. I could hardly bring myself to answer it, but something about that ringing seemed to call to me, almost like I didn't have a choice. I reached for the receiver, my hand trembling as I lifted it to my ear. Hello, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A voice came through, familiar but wrong. Don't ignore the signs, you know better. It said, calm and cold. My heart skipped a beat. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't even my roommate Eric's voice this time. This voice was older. It sounded like someone who had lived a lifetime of regrets. Who is this? I managed to choke out. The line was silent for a moment, the only sound the faint static in the background. Then the voice came again, slower this time. You really don't remember, do you? You opened the door. Now it's too late. I couldn't speak. I wanted to hang up, but my fingers wouldn't obey. I felt like I was slipping into some kind of trance. It was as though the voice was pulling me in, drawing out something that had been hidden away for years. The voice continued. They're coming for you, you know. They've always been here, waiting, watching. All it took was one small mistake. What mistake, I asked, my breath catching in my throat. There was a soft chuckle, the kind that sends chills down your spine. You didn't listen, did you? The voice replied. You played the tapes. You invited them in. Before I could say another word, the line went dead. The receiver in my hand was warm, and for a moment I thought I could feel the faint imprint of another hand on it. But when I looked, there was no one there. I sat back in my chair, staring at the phone, my mind racing. I thought about what Becker had said, the tapes, the voices, the entities that followed them. How they wanted to replace us, how they wanted to be us. But what if they'd already started? I didn't trust myself anymore. I didn't trust the voice I heard, and I didn't trust the strange, twisted reflection of myself that had shown up on the camera. I didn't even trust the room around me. Something was different. I could feel it. The air had shifted thick with some kind of palpable tension. It was like I was no longer alone, like something was watching me. And it wasn't just the camera. Something far worse had begun to pay attention. I should have turned the tapes in. I should have destroyed them, burned them in front of a fire. But now I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was addicted to the mystery. It was in that moment, sitting in the stillness of the dark studio, that I made a decision. I would listen to the last tape Becker had given me. The one with the red X. The one that was supposed to be the final warning. But I was wrong. That wasn't the final warning. The last tape was something far worse. I went back to my desk, the box of tapes still sitting there in the corner, like a forbidden treasure chest. The one tape red X on it sat on top of the rest, like it was waiting for me. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the weight of it more than ever. My heart pounded as I slipped it into the recorder. The tape began to play, but it wasn't a voice that came through this time. It was a song, a lullaby. I didn't recognize it at first, but as the melody played on, a horrible realization sank in. It was a lullaby my mother used to sing to me when I was little. A lullaby she only stopped singing after she disappeared. The words on the tape weren't coming from her voice, though. They were distorted, twisted, layered over each other, as though multiple voices were singing the same song at once. The song I thought I had forgotten, buried deep in my childhood memories. But as the tape played, I began to hear something else. A message, not a spoken one. A silent one buried within the lullaby. It wasn't just a song, it was a command. The last line of the lullaby played over and over, getting louder each time. Come home, come home, come home. I felt the room close in on me. My pulse quickened, and that oppressive silence that had settled over the studio felt suffocating now. Come home. The words from the lullaby repeated like an echo that refused to fade. My body froze as I sat there listening to it. It wasn't just a song. It was something else. A call, a demand, something older and far more powerful than I was prepared to face. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the recorder, ready to tear the tape out and stop the nightmare from continuing. But as my hands moved to eject the tape, the recording continued on its own, louder, more insistent. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away from it, from everything that had been happening, but I was glued to the chair, unable to make myself move. The last line, come home, wasn't just words anymore. It was a force. It felt like someone or something was trying to reach through the speakers, pulling at me, tugging at my mind, trying to drag me into whatever world that song belonged to. For a brief moment, I thought about the past, the other stories, the voices, the strange reflections on the camera. Everything had been leading to this, hadn't it? The signs, the warnings, the creeping sense that I was walking down a path that led nowhere but straight into the unknown. Into them. I should have listened to Becker. I should have thrown the tapes away, left them in a dumpster, forgotten about them forever. But instead, I'd let curiosity win. And now curiosity was going to cost me. It felt like I wasn't alone in the room anymore. I glanced around, my breath coming faster, as I searched the corners of the studio, but the shadows were deep, the lights dim. Still, something had changed. The atmosphere had shifted. It felt like eyes were watching me. I could almost hear the faintest whisper, like a breath against my neck, too soft to identify. Then I heard it. The rustling of fabric, the sound of something moving just outside my peripheral vision. It was slow at first, like something dragging its feet, and then it became more urgent, more deliberate. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. Just the faint humming of the lights, the whirring of the old equipment, and that horrible lullaby. But then I saw it. In the reflection of the glass window in front of me, I saw a figure. Tall, lanky, barely discernible in the shadows, but unmistakable once I focused. It was a person, a shadow standing in the hallway just outside the studio. They weren't moving. They were just watching. I could hardly breathe as I stared at the reflection, unsure if I was seeing things. But there was no mistaking the way they stood, as if waiting for me to make the next move. Waiting for me to cross the threshold. Waiting for me to acknowledge their presence. And just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure was gone. Vanished like a wisp of smoke. I looked back at the monitor. The tape was still playing, but something had changed. The screen was filled with static, and the once crystal-clear reflection of myself was now distorted. The face staring back at me wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't even human. There were eyes, too many, too dark, swirling across the screen like a black void was bleeding through the image, replacing the reflection of my face with something far more sinister. The mouth was wrong, too, stretching wide, too wide, in a grotesque grin. A grin that was not mine. The tape hadn't finished yet. It was still playing. I couldn't move. I couldn't stop it. I could feel the pull again, like a magnet drawing me closer to the screen. Something in the depths of the static was calling me, whispering to me, just out of reach, but close enough that I could almost make out the words, "Come home." And then I remembered. The voice. The other voice from earlier on the phone. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a prank. It was me. That voice, the one on the phone, had been mine, but not mine. It was a reflection of me. A copy. A twisted version of myself talking to me from wherever it had come from. Wherever this place, this thing had pulled me into. Come home. The voice kept repeating that same phrase, now rising with a violent urgency, like a scream urging me to move, to follow. I snapped out of my trance, heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a game. This wasn't just some radio station story gone wrong. This was real. It was happening, and it had been happening for far longer than I had ever realized. I grabbed the recorder again, yanking the tape out of it with shaking hands. I was done. I was not going to let whatever was on that tape reach me any further. But even as I held the tape in my hand, I could feel a growing unease. I glanced toward the door. It was still ajar. I hadn't heard anyone enter, but I couldn't help but wonder if something had been standing there watching. There was only one way to escape this, to destroy it. But as I reached for the nearest trash can, my eyes caught the reflection in the glass once again. The shadow in the hallway was back. This time it wasn't alone. There were more of them. Dozens. Moving. Watching. All waiting for me. I stood there frozen. The tape was still clutched tightly in my hand, but it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. The shadows outside the door had multiplied, stretching, twisting in the dim light, their figures shifting in and out of my vision like smoke. I blinked, trying to force my eyes to adjust, but they only grew more distinct, more defined. There were shapes now, humanoid, but not quite human. Their movements were jerky, erratic, like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. One of them stepped forward, its long, thin arm reaching out, and I could hear the whisper again, rising in pitch, growing more insistent, more angry. Come home. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even think straight anymore. All I could hear was the humming of the studio lights, the cold air pressing down on me, and the sickening sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. The door was still cracked open, and I had a split second to make a decision. Could I escape? Could I leave, or was I already trapped? I looked toward the exit. The hallway was now completely dark, and I could just barely make out the outline of the doorframe. The rest of the studio felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in, pushing me toward the shadows. Toward them. Come home. I glanced back at the recorder. The tape wasn't just playing anymore. It was warping the sound, distorting, as if it was fighting to escape its confines, like it was reaching out of the speakers toward me. It felt like the words, the eerie lullaby, were alive, now pulling at me, pulling me deeper into whatever nightmare this had become. I rushed forward, not thinking, my legs moving almost against my will. But before I could reach the door, something blocked my path. It wasn't physical, but it might as well have been. There was a pressure in the air, a weight that slammed into me like a wall. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. It was as if the room itself had turned against me. Come home. The voice shifted again, no longer distant, no longer coming from the tape, but from all around me. I felt the air vibrate with the words. The shadows outside the door pressed in closer, creeping toward me like tendrils of darkness, extending to every corner of the room. I knew they were coming. They were coming. And I had no way out. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming in the air. A chill like 1,000 icy fingers brushed across my skin, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I stumbled backward, shaking my eyes, darting around the room, looking for anything to hold on to. The tape. I still had the tape. I don't know why, but I grabbed it again, my hands trembling as I slid it back into the recorder, desperate for something to stop it, for something to break the hold this thing, this force had on me. The song started playing once again, but this time it was different. There was no more gentle lullaby, no more sweet melody. The music was distorted, twisted like an inhuman growl, a scraping sound as if it was scraping the very fabric of reality. The notes scraped against my mind, jagged and broken, tearing at something deep inside of me. And then I heard it, a scream. It wasn't a person. It wasn't human. It was a sound raw and guttural, something pulled from the depths of the earth. It was coming from the speakers, but not just from the speakers anymore. The scream filled the entire room, vibrating through the walls, shaking the floor beneath my feet. The shadows shifted again, and I saw them clearly now. They were no longer humanoid figures. They had taken a form, an awful, writhing mass of limbs and faces, overlapping, twisting, all reaching toward me. Eyes, mouths, hands, all pulling together, becoming one. And they were getting closer. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I could barely breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't even scream. The tape still played. The voice now no longer a lullaby, but a growl wrapped around my consciousness, its command repeating over and over. Come home. And I realized then with a sinking feeling that I wasn't meant to leave. Not really. They wanted me here. They wanted me with them. Whatever these things were, whatever this place had become, it was dragging me down, drawing me into its depths, into the shadows where I would be just another face, another lost soul among the others. I reached out a hand, but it was no use. The shadows closed in, and I felt myself pulled toward them like gravity had ceased to exist, and the darkness was the only thing keeping me grounded. The tape had become everything. The sound, the command, and I was its captive. I wanted to fight to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My arms wouldn't raise. The shadows were everywhere now, wrapping around me, seeping into my skin, into my soul, suffocating me. And then, just before I lost consciousness, I heard the voice once again. Come home. It was the last thing I heard before everything went black. It's hard to describe what happened next. It wasn't exactly sleep, but it wasn't being awake either. It was as if time had stretched into an endless, suffocating void where nothing moved, nothing changed. I didn't feel like I was in my own body, but I also couldn't escape it. The moment I thought I might finally wake up from this nightmare, I was submerged again, deeper into the same crushing dark. When I finally came to, I wasn't alone. The shadows from before had followed me, only now they weren't distant, intangible figures anymore. They were closer. The space around me seemed warped, as if the walls themselves had stretched to fit these strange, crawling beings. I couldn't move. I could barely even breathe. The air felt thick and clammy, weighing me down like a blanket of pure dread. I could hear soft whispers, faint murmurs coming from everywhere and nowhere, and I understood at once this wasn't just happening to me. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. These things, whatever they were, had inhabited this place, and now they had found me. Or maybe I'd always been theirs. Perhaps this was where I belonged after all. And the voice. The one that had been echoing through the tape recorder. It still lingered in my ears, tugging at my consciousness like a distant memory I couldn't escape. Come home. I tried to force myself to open my eyes, but they wouldn't listen. The darkness was too thick, too overpowering. My eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. But I knew something was wrong. Something had shifted. Then suddenly I felt a touch on my arm. It was cold. Ice cold. Like the hand of death itself, reaching out to drag me back into the dark. I wanted to scream, but the air was so thick, my lungs were already suffocating. My whole body was paralyzed in terror. There was a voice again this time, a distorted version of the voice I had heard through the tape. It was deeper, somehow angrier, vibrating through the very core of the room, pressing into my chest, making the air crackle with dread. It's too late for you. The voice reverberated in my head, and my thoughts scrambled in every direction. Where was I? What was this? How could I escape if I couldn't even move? My heart was pounding and my body felt on fire despite the cold that filled the room. I realized I couldn't escape the grip of this place. It had a hold on me, on my very being. It was pulling me deeper into the shadows where there was no hope of return. That's when I heard it, the sound of a door creaking open slowly and deliberately, as though it had been waiting for me to notice. I couldn't see anything beyond the veil of darkness, but I felt the presence of something watching me, standing just outside the range of my sight. The whispers grew louder. Come home. Suddenly there was a sharp pain in my chest. It wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something inside my soul. The feeling was so intense, it made my vision blur. For a moment I thought I might pass out again, but I couldn't. I couldn't let myself slip back into that darkness. I had to move. But how? There was a flash of light, a brief, flickering illumination in the distance, far off, too far to reach, but enough to make me hope. The light was dim, barely visible, but it felt like a lifeline, a path to salvation. It was a crack in the suffocating void that I had to chase. I tried to move toward it, but as I did, I heard a sound, slow, methodical footsteps coming from the other side of the room. Someone was approaching. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They knew what I was trying to do. They were stopping me. You cannot leave. I could feel the words in my bones deep inside my chest. They were pulling me back, as if every step I took toward the light was met with something pulling me deeper into the shadows. The struggle was exhausting, physically, emotionally, mentally. But I had no choice. I had to keep moving. I kept pushing forward, my body trembling, my mind screaming for me to escape, but the light seemed to flicker farther away. The pressure around me was overwhelming. and it felt like every shadow in the room was reaching for me, trying to pull me back into its depths. The footsteps grew louder, and suddenly I felt the cold, clammy touch again, this time on my shoulder. It was impossible to tell where the touch began and where it ended. It was everywhere at once, surrounding me, suffocating me. "It's too late for you." The voice again. The words reverberated through me like thunder. Then out of nowhere, the lights in the room flickered on. I squinted against the sudden brightness, but it didn't matter. The shadows had already begun to retreat, their forms dissipating like smoke. The pressure around me loosened, and I could breathe again. The whispers faded into nothingness. The door was still open. I could see it clearly now. The hallway beyond was still there, still real, and I was free to go. But I didn't move. I couldn't. The voice, it was gone, but the weight of it still lingered. I was still trapped here, still haunted by the things I had heard, the things I had felt. I was still connected to the dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't truly alone, that something was still watching me. The room was quiet now, too quiet. For a moment, I even convinced myself it was all over, that the torment had finally ended. But the unease, the creeping sense that the shadows would return, hung in the air like a thick fog. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands clammy as I stood there frozen, staring at the open door. The hallway stretched out before me just a few feet away, but it felt miles long. I couldn't bring myself to step over the threshold. Something inside me screamed not to go, but I knew I had no choice. I forced myself to move one step at a time. My legs felt like lead, stiff with fear. The floor beneath me creaked with every step, as though the house itself was protesting my presence, reminding me that I wasn't welcome. I couldn't ignore the sensation of eyes on my back, as though something was right there, just inches away, waiting for me to look over my shoulder. But when I did, I saw nothing. As I moved farther into the hallway, I heard the sound of the floorboards above me, slow, deliberate steps, as though someone was walking right above my head. I stopped. The sound echoed through the silence, a rhythmic thud that made my skin crawl. It wasn't possible. There was no one else in the house, right? But the steps didn't stop. They came closer, getting louder, closer to the stairs to where I stood. A cold chill rushed through me, and I instinctively backed away, eyes locked on the staircase at the far end of the hallway. The footsteps had stopped. I thought for a brief moment, maybe it was over, but then came the whisper, "Come find me." The words slithered into my ears, sweet and poisonous, beckoning me to follow them, to descend into the darkened depths of the house. My heart pounded harder as I stepped closer to the stairs. The light from the hallway flickered once more, casting long, jittery shadows on the walls. The light couldn't keep up with my fear. My mind was racing. What if I went down there? What if I followed that voice? I wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but the weight of it all kept me still trapped in that space between the fear of staying and the fear of moving forward. I didn't know which choice would be worse. In the distance, I could hear the soft clink of metal, like a chain dragging on the floor. The sound grew louder, closer, until I could almost feel the cold touch of whatever it was in the air around me. The fear that had initially paralyzed me was now a fire in my veins, and I was shaking from the inside out. I reached the stairs. It felt like a lifetime before I could take the first step down my foot, feeling as if it weighed 100 pounds. Each step I took creaked louder than the last, and by the time I reached the bottom, I couldn't tell if it was the house groaning under my weight or something else entirely. A shiver ran down my spine. At the bottom of the stairs, the temperature dropped drastically, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew, damp wood, and something else, something metallic. I felt my stomach lurch. There in the dim light, I saw a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, beckoning me. "Come find me." The whisper echoed in my ears again, and without thinking, I moved toward it. The closer I got, the heavier the atmosphere grew. The door opened just enough to let a sliver of darkness spill out from the room beyond. The feeling of being drawn to it like a moth to a flame was undeniable. I reached for the door handle, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. I don't know why, but I paused there just before the door opened fully. My heart was racing, and I suddenly realized that I wasn't just being drawn toward the door, I was being pulled into it. There was no escape. With trembling fingers, I twisted the handle and opened it. The room inside was pitch black. I took one hesitant step forward, then another, my breath shallow in my chest. The door slammed shut behind me, sending a jolt of fear through my whole body. The darkness was thick, suffocating. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I reached out, feeling for something, anything, to guide me, but there was nothing but cold, empty space. And then the whispers started again. They were louder now, coming from all sides, surrounding me, suffocating me. But this time they weren't the soft, haunting words from before. This time they were angry. "Why did you leave?" The voice that spoke wasn't the one I'd heard on the tape, but it was worse, more personal, more alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I froze, unable to speak, unable to move. "You should have stayed." A sharp, agonizing pain suddenly shot through my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My body felt like it was being pulled apart, stretched in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my hands clutching at the emptiness around me. "We've been waiting for you." And then it all went quiet. The pain, the whispers, the weight of the darkness. It all faded away like a distant memory. I don't know how much time passed, but when I opened my eyes again, I was back in the hallway, the door still ajar in front of me. The weight that had once gripped me was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. But something was different. I knew in that moment that I hadn't escaped. Not truly. Whatever had been waiting for me in the dark, it was still here, still with me, watching from the shadows. And I couldn't run from it. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone, as though the very earth beneath me had come alive and was holding me in place. The air in the hallway was heavy, with a sense of finality, a suffocating presence that seemed to press against my chest with every shallow breath I took. Something had changed. Something had crossed a line that could never be undone. It wasn't just the darkness anymore. No, it was the weight of what I had done, or rather what I had allowed to happen. I had opened that door. I had gone into the dark. I had been invited, and like a fool I had answered. I glanced back toward the stairs, then to the door that had once been a mere object of curiosity. The house had always been unsettling, sure, but now it was something else entirely. It was alive, and it was waiting for me to slip up, to make one wrong move so that it could consume me entirely. And that's when I heard it again, a soft tap, 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 not from behind me, not from the floor above me, but from within the walls themselves. I froze, listening as the tapping grew louder, coming closer as though something was crawling inside the very structure of the house. My heart thundered in my chest as I turned in place, scanning every shadowy corner of the hallway. The tapping stopped, and then an eerie stillness fell. "Do you hear it?" The voice was clear now, just as if it were standing right next to me. No longer a whisper, but a chilling invitation, a command. "Do you hear it, or is it too late for you?" I instinctively moved away from the door, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the dark crack between the frame and the door. It beckoned as if it were an open wound in the world, pulling at my very soul. My legs trembled as I took a hesitant step back, then another, inching further down the hall. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wasn't listening. It was like I was caught in a trance, a force beyond my control drawing me toward the shadows. I barely noticed the sensation of cold spreading across the back of my neck, creeping down my spine. And then it hit me. The subtle sound of breath, slow, measured, as if something was exhaling right behind me. I turned sharply, but again there was nothing there, nothing but the dark. The hallway was endless now. longer somehow than it had been before. The oppressive silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Even the flickering light at the far end of the hall had dimmed, struggling to hold on to the last strands of brightness it could muster. It felt like a countdown, like the house was counting down to something, and I was the last one to know. I tried to call out, to shout for help, but my voice was swallowed, suffocated by the thick air. My words caught in my throat, heavy with dread, as though something were trying to stop me from making a sound. The silence was deafening now. I couldn't tell if it was the house or something else entirely that was keeping me from speaking, and then I saw it, a shadow just at the edge of my vision, creeping along the wall like ink spilling across paper. It was moving, and as it did, it seemed to warp the space around it. I blinked, and for a moment, I thought it was gone. But then it was closer. I could feel the temperature drop as it approached an almost unnatural cold that made my breath come out in sharp, jagged gasps. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But the house was holding me in place, keeping me here, keeping me in the center of it all. The shadow morphed, and then it took shape. A figure cloaked in darkness, its face obscured, but I could see the outline. It was tall, too tall, like it didn't belong in the space it inhabited. Its limbs were elongated, stretching unnaturally as it stepped forward, each movement slow and deliberate, as if savoring my fear. "Come closer," the voice whispered again. "We've been waiting for you." I knew this wasn't just a ghost. This wasn't just a haunting. No, it was something far worse, something that couldn't be contained in the realm of the living. It had been waiting for me for far longer than I could comprehend. It had followed me here, drawn to me perhaps from the very moment I had entered the house. It had been waiting for me to open that door, and now it was time for me to pay the price. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The air around me had thickened to the point where breathing felt like an impossible task. And as the figure drew closer, I could hear it clearer now, its breathing low and guttural, as though it were tasting the very air itself. "You are the one," it breathed so close I could feel its breath on my skin. "You are the one we've been waiting for." I opened my mouth to scream, but the words never left me. The shadow reached for me, its hands long and clawed, but as it touched me, it was like a bolt of electricity shot through my body. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was a feeling of complete surrender, like I was being absorbed, taken into something beyond myself. Something that felt endless. The room around me spun. The world blurred. My mind raced as I fought against the pull, but I couldn't break free. The figure was inside me now, coiled deep within my very soul. And then the darkness took over. For a moment, everything went quiet, and I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat.